Always use boiling water for Sheng Pu'er. Let's test that assumption. Hey everyone, I'm Sigi and I love all things Pu'er. Now, from time to time, I think it's a good idea to go back to even the most basic assumptions we have about how we like to prepare our tea, what we think we know about it, and call those into question. Kind of seeing if these still hold up, or if maybe we can try something different and gain a more nuanced understanding overall. In this effort, I'm here today to try a young and fairly fresh Sheng Pu'er at 3 different temperatures, because as probably most of you all know by now, it's quite typical for Sheng Pu'er to just be steeped with boiling water, and that's kind of the end of the discussion. But especially given more recent trends in processing, and especially for younger Sheng Pu'er tea being quite aromatic nowadays, there might be a possibility to change a few things, and maybe we'll find out that this kind of young Pu'er tea actually benefits from a temperature that isn't just straight up boiling water. So, in an effort to find that out today, I'm using the 2021 Ergazi. I still have some of my sample left of that tea. So what I'm going to be doing is I'll be doing 2 steeps, first at 80 degrees, then I'll swap out the tea for a new one, 2 steeps at 90 degrees, and finally 2 steeps at boiling. And then afterwards, we're going to talk about kind of how these compare and contrast. All right, I've already got the tea in here, 5 grams, 100 milliliters, as I said, 80-degree water. I will do a very quick rinse on this. Okay, let's go. I'm just gonna start with the first steep right away. It's a little unusual, to be completely honest, for me to do Pu'er at 80 degrees Celsius. I don't think I've ever done it myself, so this is also going to be a first for me. Gonna let this sit for just a moment so the leaves can kind of come apart properly. What do I expect from Pu'er tea at 80 degrees? If I remember correctly, a lot of the bitter compounds in tea are only really leave the leaves at a temperature of 85 degrees or higher. I'm not entirely sure anymore. So I'm kind of expecting this to be a very light, very sort of pleasant and approachable steep. But I think especially where it might fall short is mouthfeel. I think this could end up being a little bit thin in comparison to what I am used to. Okay, let's take a look in here. I feel like this still needs a little bit more time. I'm not timing my steeps this time. I'm just looking to see when it feels that they're ready, because that I think is also gonna vary between steep times. I think using boiling water makes it so your steep will be done quicker than if you use 80-degree water. But for it to be a more fair comparison, I think the steeps should have a similar amount of doneness, if you want to put it that way. Okay. let's give this a try. So, first steep at 80 degrees. Okay. And here's what it looks like. It honestly doesn't look too different from what I would have expected from this tea at 100 degrees. I have had this before during the taste of Pu'er tea at different stages of maturity video series. So let's see what it has to offer this time with 80-degree water. This is kind of green tea temperature, which could be interesting since in certain ways Sheng Pu'er is closest to green tea in terms of processing. Mm-hmm. So yeah, my first impression here after the first couple of sips is that this does have the nice fruity and high-pitched aromatics that I've noticed with this tea before, but it's a little lacking in terms of mouthfeel. As I've said, it just feels kind of a little bit thin. So it's kind of in line with what I expected. This, I think, lacks a little bit of cohesion, specifically with regards to mouthfeel. There also, in terms of taste, there isn't much to provide any kind of contrast to these high pitched aromas. It's basically just those. And overall, it feels to me like the tea at this temperature doesn't quite come together. I am going to do a second steep because obviously with pressed teas, it might also be that it's a little thin because the leaves were still unfurling and we didn't kind of get to see the whole picture. So I'm going to do steep 2 now while I finish this one. But overall, yeah, I'd say you can kind of notice that a lot of what this tea usually has to offer has not been extracted at 80 degrees Celsius. Now, if you have a tea that has nice aromatics, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there that for whatever reason you find unpleasant, then maybe this could be a way to still enjoy that tea. But honestly, if you have a tea that's quite good, then I don't think I would use this steeping method. This is more of a thing of where you kind of would intentionally try to filter out certain things in the tea that are present when you drink it with boiling water that you don't really want to have in there. But for a tea like this one, that I at least found quite pleasant and interesting with a bit of contrast and decent mouthfeel at 100 degrees Celsius, the impression I get at 80 degrees is just that there is something kind of missing. It's not really fully there. Okay, here's the second steep. I am curious to see if a few of these things will maybe improve on the second steep. And while I say that, I'm already going to turn the dial up to 90 degrees here, because We do not want to lose any time. And while this is boiling, I am going to weigh out the next 5 grams. Gonna let this preheat in the Gaiwan for a little bit while we drink the second steep of the 80-degree Ergazi together. No real change in impressions so far. It's still just... this tea in particular has these kind of tropical fruit aromas. Those come out very nicely in here, but the issue is that these aromas, for lack of better wording, don't really go challenged in any way. As I've said, there is no contrast. There is nothing that kind of balances them out. And because of that, it ends up being a bit of a less engaging experience overall. It's kind of like, if I had to compare it to some art, and I'm by no means an art expert, but the kind of art that interests me personally isn't things like just beautifully drawn landscapes with good artistic technique or anything. I find that art is a bit more interesting when it's expressive in a way, when it expresses things, especially that are difficult to put into words. And kind of in a similar vein, I think this would be, in its current state at 80 degrees, a nice landscape painting. Nice to look at, very pleasant, but also not really challenging at all, not particularly interesting. It would just be something where I'm like, yeah, sure, this is nice. Okay, let's move on. That's kind of the feeling I get here. And that's not exactly the feeling I want from my Pu'er tea. I want something a bit more interesting, with more depth, more staying power, something that keeps me interested in it. And at 80 degrees, at least in my opinion, Pu'er tea is just not it. It's missing so much of what makes this a fascinating tea otherwise. So yeah, especially in terms of mouthfeel, but also in terms of the taste that you're not getting at 80 degrees. I don't particularly enjoy or recommend doing this. Let's see if 90 degrees changes anything. We are moving up by a full 10 degrees. I'm sure you could differentiate just between those again and do like 85 and then 90. But I also wanted to do fairly big steps in this video because I expect there to be quite significant differences. At 90 degrees, I expect the mouthfeel to be better than before, but I'm also expecting this to have a kind of decent amount of bitterness now. Okay. Since this one was just one full solid chunk, it's also taking a little bit of time to come apart. Hopefully not too long. Yeah, I feel like it's almost ready to go now. Like the first steep on the previous one was also a bit lighter, so I think we can decant now and sort of replicate that. Okay. Compared to the 80 degrees tea, I'm not really seeing any difference in color here. I think it's about the same, which probably isn't too surprising. It might be that this one is a little bit fuller, which would make sense, like higher temperature extracts more things that are in the tea, etc. But it's kind of hard to judge that without going back and looking at the color, which you, dear viewers, can of course do. And while I am already addressing you, I think we are about halfway through the video. If you enjoy what I'm doing here, if you like nannuoshan, or if you are interested in tea or have recently become interested in tea, please leave a like, leave a comment. Maybe you've also done an experiment like this. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts and experiences. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, of course. I think I checked recently and we are actually pretty close to 5,000 subscribers. Would be cool if we could get there at some point. Okay. I think it's time to try the 90 degrees Celsius Ergazi in comparison to the 80 degrees one. Yeah, right away I noticed that it has thickened up a bit. Better mouthfeel. I don't have that immediate feeling of kind of thinness or emptiness that I had with the 80 degrees tea. So this is right off the bat a significantly more enjoyable experience. But at the same time, it's hard to say. We'll have to compare to the 100 degrees version in a bit, though I do feel like it's not quite there yet. That, again, may also just be it being the first steep, the tea not having come apart yet. So we are going to do a second steep right away to see what we can get out of it. Okay. But yeah, I'd say this is immediately better. We are getting a bit of contrast now, though the high-pitched tropical fruit type aromas are still a bit dominant, which I don't really see as an issue at this point. I think it's much better balanced now. It's a fair bit more interesting than at 80 degrees. So maybe if you are somebody who is very sensitive to things like bitterness or astringency, this tea at 90 degrees could be more enjoyable for you than at 100 degrees. But it does probably come with a bit of a trade-off, which I think we are going to see once we hit the 100 degrees mark. Okay. Let's take another quick look before we decant, but I think this is good to go. Yeah. Okay. There we go. So this one's in there. It does look pretty nice overall. Yeah, it is kind of difficult to comment on this outside of saying that it's definitely better than at 80 degrees, because I really want the frame of reference. I want those 100-degree steeps to see really what the difference is like, and if there is as much of a difference between 90 and 100 degrees as there is between 80 and 90 degrees. But just by itself on the surface, I can recommend 90 degrees much more than 80. So we're definitely moving in the right direction. Okay. And while I let this cool down for a moment, because it is 10 degrees hotter than the previous one, I'm gonna get the third batch ready. I'm also gonna, I'm not gonna move this to boiling yet, because this kettle really goes a bit wild when it just has boiling water in it. So I'm gonna do that right before we do the steep, and not now. Okay. Oh. Okay, but I am gonna put this into the preheated gaiwan though, just to kind of wake it up a little bit. Okay. Yeah, this tea definitely still needed to open up and have the leaves come apart. I'm noticing a fair bit more bitterness, but also more thickness on this second steep of the 90 degrees tea. I think if you gave this to me after not having had the Ergazi at 100 degrees for a while, I wouldn't have been able to guess that this was steeped at 90 degrees Celsius. Because this right now presents in a way that's very similar to what I remember from my first time having this tea. Okay. I am going to move this up to 100 now. Let's keep those steeps moving along. And then I'll be able to taste this while the impression of the 90 degree Celsius Ergazi is still present. Yeah, this is boiling now. Just gonna put it in here real quick. Okay, like before, this is gonna need a moment to come apart. But we finally arrived at the, let's call it common knowledge, 100 degrees Celsius for Pu'er tea. It's finally time to see if it really needs to be that way, or if it's also okay to go a bit lower. I do think we've already successfully kind of disqualified 80 degrees Celsius unless you want it for a really specific application. It is not something I'd recommend that you do on kind of a daily basis and with every Pu'er tea you get. 90 degrees is getting a bit closer to that for sure. I could see doing that more often, or at least it doesn't need as much of a specific use case as 80 degrees water with pu'er tea. Oh, I'm very curious though how what we just had, which already was quite a good impression, is going to hold up to how people usually say it should be done, with just straight up boiling water, get in there. The leaves have already come apart, so I think we're good to go on this one. I am gonna wait just a little bit before drinking this though, because it is formally boiling water. It will be very hot and I don't want to burn my tongue. I'd say no real difference in color once again. Maybe a little bit kind of darker, a little bit more vibrant than before, but it's really impossible to judge. Yeah. Ah, this still feels very hot. I think I need to wait just a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. It's it's really kind of hard to put it any other way, but with boiling water is, I think, where this tea really does come together. While we did experience more coherence compared to 80 degrees when we had the 90 degrees Ergazi, this is where it really kind of starts to shine and comes into its own. This is where it feels like a cohesive experience, where you get enough of all the different aspects to really have it become a tea that is quite enjoyable and presents a few different things. I think even if the 90-degree version was quite nice and already fairly interesting, I think this one just stands out compared to the other two when it comes to kind of how much you can get out of the tea. Both in terms of like how much, how many kind of the tea's chemicals come into the tea water, how much you can extract, but also how much of an experience you can get out of the tea. Okay. Uh, I'm just gonna go in there again right away for the second steep. But yeah, what is there to say? I am honestly already quite convinced that uh, it turns out that boiling water is indeed the uh, go-to. You can, of course, deviate from that, and some teas may demand that. But if we're looking at what you want to use as your starting point before you change anything, I think boiling water is very much the go-to. I do feel like you're going to miss a significant part of the cohesive experience of most better quality pu'er teas if you don't use boiling water for them. And while, of course, you may not always be in the mood for the entire full-blown pu'er tea experience, if you're attempting to evaluate a tea, let's say, then boiling water is the best by far. I think it's likely also the best when it comes to uncovering flaws in the tea, if there are any. There aren't really any in this one. But even without the flaws, boiling water is going to give you the most kind of holistic experience that you can get from your tea. It's going to bring out the most. It's going to bring the most out of your tea leaves. That's what I wanted to say. So, to conclude, what can we say that we learned in this experiment? I'm going to sum it up with my personal opinions that I've gained from doing this. I think 80 degrees Celsius is something I personally would never go for. If I want an experience like that, I'd honestly most likely just drink green tea instead, or yellow tea even. 90 degrees, significantly better, but you still don't really get the whole picture. It does feel nice and pleasant. It might work well for some teas, but if I'm drinking in a more focused way and I pay attention to the tea, I feel like I would be doing myself a bit of a disservice if I only prepare it at 90 degrees Celsius. Of course, this all doesn't go to say that it's going to be true for every pu'er tea out there. Pu'er tea is still an incredibly diverse tea from like lots of different places with lots of different climates and lots of different situations. So there may genuinely be pu'er tea that is better at this 90-degree mark. However, I think I am still going to default to preparing my pu'er tea at 100 degrees Celsius, and I will only go down to 90 if I feel like there is some kind of issue with the tea when prepared at boiling temperatures. Because, to be quite honest, preparing it this way with 100 degrees Celsius water will just give me the most out of the tea. And that's kind of what I like. I like it when my teas give me a whole bunch of different things that I can kind of look at and lose myself in. So yeah, that was the Sheng tea temperature experiment. Those are my conclusions. I'd also be interested to see what conclusions you come to if you decide to replicate this experiment. I'd especially be interested if you are somebody who has the preference to not use boiling water for your Sheng Pu'er, and I'd be curious to see whether this kind of experiment ends up changing your mind or confirming the way you already prepare your tea. However, that is all from me for now. I'll be back with more videos soon. I hope you'll all have a wonderful day wherever in the world you may be, and goodbye.